Hello, I'm Todd Phillips, the editor of Canadian Auto Dealer. We're here today with Virginia Connell. She's a manager of research for JD Power Canada, and the company has just launched a survey right in the midst of this pandemic to try to figure out, the mood of Canadian car buyers and the ways that they may want to interact with dealers. Very timely research, and I guess like many companies, you're innovating on the fly and trying to introduce new services and new tools right in the midst of this, so that we can help the industry learn. I'm sure there'll be a lot of interest from dealers about your findings. So can you please walk us through some of your findings?
Hi, Todd. Yeah, thanks so much for having me on today. So we're happy to discuss the findings from our initial wave of the JD Power Canada COVID-19 Pulse Survey. So in terms of some of the methodology, this initial wave opened field on April 3rd, and it was an online survey. The responses that we collected were just over 1,000 out of 1,098. So the initial wave of data came from responses that we collected between April 3rd and April 8th. So some of the key findings that we found from the study, well, first and foremost, we initially asked vehicle owners what their level of stress was when it came to the current COVID-19 crisis that's unfolding. And we saw that really most vehicle owners had some level of stress when it came to the situation, at over 90%. And actually 1 in 5 were either very or extremely stressed about this current situation. So we know stress has an impact on, many aspects of our lives. So it's important to kind of keep that in mind as it affects our decision making as well when it comes to, purchasing a vehicle or servicing a vehicle during this time. In terms of purchasing specifically, we found that 18% of vehicle owners had a plan to purchase a new vehicle in the coming 12 months prior to the COVID-19 situation unfolding. And of that 18%, we found when we asked them, do you still have this plan to purchase a vehicle in the coming 12 months, that 63% still have kept that plan to purchase. So we see 37% who have shifted a plan to purchase. And right now, most of that shift is going into an undecided category. So they're not really sure whether they'll still make that purchase in the coming 12 months. And I guess sort of that uncertainty is a bit of a defining feature that we see, across all aspects of life really right now. So that's kind of the situation when it comes to shifting purchases. And I guess a bit of a topical piece of information as well, now that we're isolated here in our homes, is whether or not there's interest in purchasing a vehicle online. So we did ask vehicle owners whether they'd have any willingness to complete a full vehicle purchase online. And we found that 39% had some willingness, so 29% probably would purchase a vehicle online, and 10% said I definitely would purchase a vehicle online. So that's some interesting findings, as not many manufacturers today have this full capability to go from start to finish with a purchase online. One barrier that we identified to this process definitely would be entering your financial information online for a lease or a loan, where about 2/3 of respondents said they probably wouldn't or definitely wouldn't. So manufacturers and dealerships alike definitely have some reassurances they need to provide to vehicle purchasers in order to sort of ease their worries around entering their financial information online.
So, interesting. Just to recap that, some fascinating information. So it looks like the consumers aren't sure, because car dealers are all really focused on trying to get their businesses back up and operating so they can serve consumers. But we've also had an economic shock that has really disrupted a lot of the buyers. And I'm sure a big ticket purchase like a car or house are always one of those things that are very related to their own economic situation. So we've got kind of an uncertain pause. But then even beyond that, I think even the way in which they want to interact with dealers, it sounds like, is evolving, and you're testing that. So it's going to be very interesting to see, and I'm sure you can share some other findings, but you're going to be measuring this on a pretty regular basis during this. We may be able to see if there's any movement in some of these numbers as people get more, as their economic situation becomes clearer, for example, or as they start to interact with dealerships or other businesses in a more virtual way to see whether they might be more comfortable with some of these tools. So maybe speak about, how often you're going to be sort of measuring the pulse, if you will, of Canadians.
Yeah, absolutely. So our plan currently is to run this survey bi-weekly, to be collecting this data on an ongoing trending metric, basically, to see how the sentiment is changing and the attitudes and behaviors that vehicle purchasers and owners are really willing to interact with dealerships going forward, if we see any change in the coming weeks in regard to that.
And one of the things, obviously, that we're all curious about, and we'll see, is whether which of these trends, in terms of not necessarily consuming the entire car buying experience online, but there are a lot of elements of that experience in acquiring a vehicle, in terms of shopping, testing, the F&I and finance experience that you mentioned earlier, whether these are more lasting trends that we're never going to go back on. So it'll be very interesting to see, as you measure this over time. Any thoughts on how that might look going forward? I know you like to do research based on the known, but if I could push you out of your comfort zone and talk about the unknown for a second, what do you think in terms of how we might see these numbers change over time?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is kind of a shock to most industries in the way we were currently operating. So it's definitely going to make everyone take pause and think about, is there a more efficient way we can be doing this? How can we best interact with customers going forward? So I think this will definitely be something where we need to create new processes and perfect them going forward, to really make sure we're satisfying customers and giving them the best experience that's possible when it comes to both an online virtual interaction and also in person, for to have a good balance really going forward.
And I applaud you and JD Power for continuing to sort of do this kind of work. I'm sure the OEMs as a whole and the dealers are very interested in the findings. Are you finding, in your own conversation with them, you have your relations with them, that they're curious to see where these numbers are trending?
Yeah, absolutely. We've had a great response from dealerships and our clients across the country. So we're very grateful for that and happy to provide these results to, do whatever we can to help out during this time.
Great. Hey, thanks for that. So another issue really is not only involving the sale of the vehicle and the financing, as you mentioned, but also the service experience. I'm sure that you're measuring also consumers' attitudes towards that and how they want to interact with the dealership. Can you take us through some of the findings on the service side of the business?
Yeah, definitely, Todd. So we asked vehicle owners whether they had any intention to service their vehicle in the coming weeks. And if they did, would they continue to follow through with that plan to service, or would they defer to a later time? And what we found is 43% of vehicle owners would defer servicing until the outbreak subsides. So from a dealership perspective, we tried to investigate what are some alternative approaches that could be taken to servicing that would be comfortable for vehicle owners today. So some of the alternative approaches that they could take that were most comfortable with vehicle owners included coming to the owner's home to pick up the vehicle for service and then drop it back off after. And also about 40% were interested in a no contact drop off process. So using something like a key box, et cetera, at the dealership. As well, we asked what were some important actions that dealerships could take to make a owner feel comfortable servicing today. So the most frequently selected answers were around picking up and dropping off the vehicle again at their home, but also cleaning and sanitizing the customer's vehicles. So we know from studies that the COVID-19 virus can last on vehicles or on certain surfaces for several days. So I think that's something important that dealerships and service providers should really be communicating to their customers around what are my procedures for cleaning and sanitizing the vehicle. And that'll really help provide some assurance to vehicle owners to take their vehicle in for service if it's needed today.
Well, that's some great information, Virginia. Thanks for sharing that with us today. I'm sure there'll be ongoing interest down the road. We hope to touch base with you again, and maybe as these metrics change over time, touch base again and try to bring that information to the community. So thank you for your time today.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Todd.
Signing off.